The dean's voice cut through the recital hall like a blade. Your grandfather, the biker, what could he possibly know about Rachmaninoff? Ridge Cole stood in his Hell's Angels vest, 61 years old, silver-bearded, boots still carrying dust from a 300-mile ride. Around him, silk dresses, pearl necklaces, men in tuxedos pulling their wives just slightly closer. His granddaughter Savvy had just done the one thing she was told never to do. Ignored the dean's orders and announced she would play the hardest piano concerto ever written. Now the entire academy faculty was demanding answers. What they didn't know was that the man they had already judged, the dangerous biker in the back row, carried a secret buried for 25 years. A secret that would collapse every assumption in that room before the night was over. Before we continue this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We would love to hear from you. Her name is Savannah Cole. Everyone who loves her calls her Savvy. She is 22 years old, and she grew up above a mechanic's garage in a Rust Belt town where the biggest cultural event of the year was the 4th of July parade. She practiced piano on a second-hand upright with 2 missing ivory keys, the kind of instrument that sounds slightly wrong no matter how perfectly you play it. She learned to compensate. She learned to hear what was missing and fill it in with her own hands. That skill, more than anything else, is what got her the scholarship. Her grandfather's name is Raymond Cole, but nobody who rides with him calls him Raymond. They call him Ridge, short for Ridgeline, because that is where he once sat for 6 hours during a firefight in the Vietnamese highlands without making a sound. He is a Vietnam-era Marine veteran, a Hells Angels member for more than 30 years, soft-spoken in a way that large, dangerous men sometimes are. He never brags, never raises his voice unless something truly matters. He keeps an old brass metronome in the top drawer of his dresser. He has never explained why. Savvy had asked him once, when she was about 12. He just looked at it for a moment, then closed the drawer. Savvy's mother, Ridge's daughter, died when Savvy was 4 years old. A short illness that moved faster than anyone expected. Ridge drove 8 hours to collect his granddaughter and never once suggested she was a burden. He never missed a school recital, not one. He sat in the back row of every elementary school auditorium and every middle school showcase with his big hands folded in his lap and his vest hanging off the chair behind him. He made every tuition payment on time. When Savvy had her first breakdown over a scholarship audition at 17, crying on the kitchen floor at midnight, Ridge sat down on the linoleum next to her and stayed there until she stopped. He did not tell her it would be fine. He did not tell her to breathe. He just stayed. What he never told her, not once in 22 years, was that he had graduated from the Whitmore Conservatory of Music in 1989, top of his class, full scholarship. Faculty called him once in a generation. He had been weeks away from a European debut tour when everything changed. There are small hints, if you know what to look for. He leaves rooms when certain composers are mentioned, specifically Rachmaninoff. His hands tremble slightly when the second movement of the second piano concerto comes over a radio. He once corrected a tuning on Savvy's keyboard without thinking, the kind of correction that takes real training. She noticed. She filed it away. She never asked. The Academy's Director of Performance Standards is a woman named Dean Lillian Harrow. She is the kind of person who has never doubted her own taste, not once, not for a single moment in her entire professional life. She wears her credentials the way some people wear jewelry, constantly, on purpose, in case you forgot. She believes in pedigree. She says she believes in merit, but what she really believes is that merit only fully develops in certain kinds of soil. And when Savvy Cole's file crossed her desk, scholarship student, small town, deceased mother, grandfather with a criminal record, Lillian Harrow made a quiet judgment. She would never say it out loud. She is far too controlled for that. But the judgment was made. 3 weeks before the spring recital, Harrow pulled Savvy aside after rehearsal. She spoke gently, which is how people like her speak when they are being unkind. She said that for a student in Savvy's first full scholarship year, it might be wise to choose something accessible, something that shows technical competence without overreaching. She said, and these were her precise words, that the recital program should reflect what a student has genuinely mastered, not what they hope to master someday. Savvy had wanted to perform the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto, one of the hardest pieces in the classical repertoire. Harrow was telling her, as delicately as possible, to aim lower, to stay in her lane. Translation: you do not belong here the way the others do, so do not pretend that you do. The rehearsal 2 weeks before the recital was the moment things cracked open. Ridge had driven 4 hours to sit in on the session. He always came when he could. He sat in the third row with 2 of his brothers from the chapter, Devlin and a man they called Ox. They sat quietly and watched. Savvy was mid-phrase on her selected piece, a Chopin nocturne, safe, lovely, exactly what Harrow had pushed her toward when Harrow stopped the rehearsal. She did not stop it to correct Savvy. She stopped it to make a comment. She looked out at the assembled parents and faculty guests and said that the Academy took seriously the question of whether a student's home environment supported the kind of disciplined culture classical training demands. Parents shifted in their seats. Eyes moved, the way eyes do when something uncomfortable is happening and nobody wants to be caught looking. They drifted toward the back row, toward Devlin and Ox and Ridge, toward the leather vests and the road-worn boots and the patches. A woman in the second row whispered something to the man beside her. He nodded slightly. Ridge sat very still. He has a quality. People who know him will tell you this, where his stillness becomes a kind of weight in a room. He was very still right then. Then Harrow used the word that changed everything. She said, "We must maintain standards." That word, standards. It landed in the room like something dropped from a height. And Ridge stood up. Not loudly, not aggressively. He just rose from his seat, and the room registered it. This big, silver-bearded man with a road-cracked face and a Hell's Angels patch. And he said, calmly and clearly, "I think she can handle standards." The room froze. Harrow looked at him, and something passed across her face in that moment. Not quite fear, but something adjacent to it. She composed herself in about 2 seconds, the way she always does. But those 2 seconds told you everything. If you believe that people should never be judged by how they look, especially when they have earned every single thing they have, hit that like button and subscribe. Because not everyone who wears leather lacks class. And not every institution that hangs a framed pedigree on the wall actually understands what excellence looks like when it walks in from the outside. That night, Savvy sat in her apartment and stared at her keyboard for 40 minutes without playing a single note. The Chopin was sitting on the music stand in front of her. It is a beautiful piece. She loves it. But playing it now felt like giving in to something. She had not chosen that piece. It had been chosen for her, by a woman who looked at her family and saw a liability. She thought about switching back to the Rachmaninoff. Then she thought about what that would cost her, academically, professionally, in terms of how faculty would treat her for the rest of the year if she failed publicly on a piece she had been specifically advised against. She sat there with all of that weight on her and did not play anything. Ridge knocked on her door just after 9. He let himself in the way he always does, with a short knock and then the door swinging open before she could answer. He saw the keyboard. He saw her face. He sat down in the chair by the window and looked at the sheet music on the stand. And then he said something that stopped her cold. He said, "You're still on the third movement." He said it the way you would say it if you knew the piece. Not generally, intimately. He said it the way a person says something when they have spent years inside a particular piece of music and know exactly where the hard parts are. Savvy turned around slowly. She said, "Gramps, how do you know that?" It was not quite a question. He looked at the sheet music for a moment. Then he stood up, walked to the bench, sat down, and without looking at the notation, without glancing at the page even once, he placed his hands on the keys and corrected her fingering position from memory. Not roughly, with the kind of precision that comes from 10,000 hours. She felt her throat go tight. She said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm your grandfather." She said, "That is not what I mean." He was quiet for a long moment. And then he said, "I trained formally. A long time ago." He did not tell her everything that night. He told her enough. He told her he had a full scholarship. He told her he was top of his class. He told her that people who had watched him play called it something special. And then he stopped. She asked what happened. He said he would explain it someday. Not tonight. She looked at him for a long time. This man she had known her entire life. This man with the road scars and the silent metronome in his dresser drawer. And she realized she had never actually known him. Not fully. And that realization did something to her. It did not break her. It clarified her. She looked at the Rachmaninoff and said, "Then help me." Over the next 6 weeks, Ridge drove out to her apartment 4 nights a week. He brought nothing but himself. No notes. No markings. He sat beside her at the bench and taught her the way he had apparently once been taught. Without comfort. Without false praise. Without the word almost. His vocabulary during those sessions had 3 entries: again, slower, and listen. He did not tell her she was doing well. He told her when she was doing it correctly, which is not the same thing. He made her play certain passages 40, 50 times in a single session until the muscle memory was complete enough that her brain could stop thinking and start feeling. There is a difference. Every real musician knows the difference. Devlin stopped by one night during a session and stood in the doorway listening. He didn't say anything for about 10 minutes. Then he walked back to the kitchen and made 3 cups of coffee without being asked. Ox came another night and sat on the couch with his big arms folded across his chest and his eyes closed, just listening. These men who had ridden thousands of miles of open road together. Men who had seen things and done things and kept each other's secrets for decades. They sat in a small apartment in a college town and listened to an old biker teach his granddaughter Rachmaninoff. And none of them found it strange. Because loyalty does not ask what something looks like. It only asks what it means. Savvy realized something during those 6 weeks that she had not expected. He was not just good. Ridge was elite. The kind of player whose technique is so clean and so deep that it becomes invisible. You stop hearing the effort, and you just hear the music. She had been around trained musicians her entire conservatory life. She had heard full professors play. And the man sitting next to her on her second-hand piano bench was in a different category. Which meant the question that had been sitting quietly in the back of her mind was growing louder. What happened? What could possibly have happened that would make a man like this disappear from music entirely for 25 years? Before we get to recital night, I want to ask you something honestly. If an authority figure told you to stay in your lane because of where you came from, would you back down or play the harder piece to prove them wrong? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever been judged before you even spoke? Recital night arrived on a Thursday in late April. The hall was dressed up the way it always is for the spring showcase. Fresh flowers, programs printed on heavy stock paper, faculty in their formal wear. Parents arrived early. The kind of parents who arrive early to things like this. And there, filing into the back row with the calm and deliberate pace of men who have walked into many rooms where they were not expected, Ridge, Devlin, Ox, and 4 other brothers from the chapter. 7 of them total. Leather vests. Boots that had covered more American highway than most of the people in that room would ever see. They sat. They folded their hands. They waited. The whispers started the moment they walked in. You could feel the room recalibrate. Heads turned. Mothers leaned toward their husbands. A faculty member near the side door made eye contact with another faculty member, and something passed between them, a slight widening of the eyes, a micro-adjustment of composure. Dean Harrow, standing near the program table, saw them come in. She saw Ridge specifically, and she straightened in a way that told you she was working to keep her expression neutral. Savvy performed fourth in the program. When the student before her finished and the polite applause settled, she walked to the stage. She adjusted the bench. She positioned her hands. And then she looked at the program director at the side of the stage and announced that she would be performing the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto. The director blinked. Audible gasps from the audience. Not many, but enough. A mother near the front covered her mouth slightly. A faculty member shook his head once, almost imperceptibly, and Dean Harrow, from her position at the side of the room, went very still. And then Savvy began to play. For the first two movements, the room was absolutely silent in the specific way that rooms go silent when they are being won over against their will. She was playing it, truly playing it, not surviving it, not managing it, but inhabiting it. The second movement opened up the way it does when someone really understands it, like a room you have been in 1,000 times in the dark and can finally see clearly. People stopped their private conversations. Faculty members who had come in slightly skeptical began leaning forward. In the back row, Ridge sat with his hands still and his face quiet. Then the third movement arrived, and something happened. The kind of thing that happens to live performers sometimes, a sudden gap between the body and the mind, a moment where nerves cut through the muscle memory like a wire snapping. Savvy's hand stuttered. 2 notes. A fractional pause. In a room where everyone was already waiting for her to fail, that pause was enormous. Someone in the audience exhaled. Harrow's chin came up slightly. Savvy stopped. Silence filled the hall like water. She looked out at the audience. She found him immediately, Ridge, in the back row, not moving. And he did one thing. He nodded. Once. Slowly. The way he used to nod when she was 12 and terrified of the dark, and he had come to sit in the hallway outside her door. It meant, I am here. It means, go. She turned back to the keys. She played. And this time something had broken open in her. The nerves were gone, replaced by something harder and cleaner and deeper. She finished the concerto with a precision and an emotional weight that had not been there before the pause. Sometimes the stumble is the performance. The applause began before she had even fully lifted her hands from the final chord. It built fast, not the polite applause of an Academy showcase, but the real kind, involuntary and layered. Several people stood. Faculty members who had been skeptical 30 minutes ago were on their feet. In the back row, Devlin was clapping with his big hands, making a sound like a bat hitting something solid. Ox was standing with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that a person who didn't know him might mistake for anger, but was actually the look he makes when something genuinely moves him. That was when Harrow moved. She stepped forward from the side of the room, her face composed, her voice carrying the particular authority she has spent decades cultivating. She addressed the hall. She said that while Miss Cole's performance was admirable, the Academy had been made aware that Miss Cole had received outside coaching that had not been disclosed or approved. Under Academy policy, undisclosed external instruction is a violation of scholarship terms. She said a formal review would be initiated. She said it all with the precise, polished language of someone who had been waiting for an opening. The standing ovation died mid-breath. The room turned cold. Savvy stood at the piano and did not move. And then Ridge stood up. He moved through the row without hurrying, the way he moves through every situation, unhurried, direct, entirely clear about where he is going. He walked to the stage. The room watched him the way rooms watch things they do not know how to classify. He reached the piano. He looked at Harrow. He said, quietly enough that the front rows could barely hear him, "May I?" He was not asking for permission. He sat down at the bench. He rolled his shoulders once. He placed his hands on the keys. And then Raymond Ridge Cole began to play. He played the same concerto, the same Rachmaninoff third. But what came out of that piano was something else entirely. He played it the way the piece sounds in the imagination of the composer. Not technically perfect, which he was, but alive in a way that technique alone cannot produce. He played it with the weight of 25 years of silence behind every note. The room went completely still. Not the performing audience kind of still, the involuntary kind. The kind of stillness that overtakes a crowd when it encounters something it was not prepared for. A woman near the front began crying before she understood why. A faculty professor pressed his hand flat against his chest as if checking for something. When he finished, the silence held for a long moment before the applause arrived. And when it did, it was total. The whole room. Everyone standing. Ridge sat at the bench for a moment, his hands resting on the keys, his head slightly bowed. Then he stood and faced the audience. He said his name clearly. He said, Raymond Cole, class of 1989, Whitmore Conservatory. And at the far end of the second row, an older man in a dark suit went pale. Pale in the way that people go pale when they hear something that reaches across years and touches a specific memory. He rose to his feet slowly. His name was Professor Gerald Ashby. He had been retired for 11 years. He had been invited as a guest this evening by a former student. He stared at Ridge across the hall. His mouth moved. What he said, to the person standing next to him, was, "That's Marcus Cole. I taught Marcus Cole." The murmur that moved through the room when Ashby said that name, the real name, the conservatory name, the name attached to a scholarship file from 1989 that described a once-in-a-generation talent, that murmur was something. Harrow heard it. She turned toward Ashby with a look on her face that was not quite recognition, but was something close to it. An academy colleague near her leaned in and said something in a low voice. Harrow's expression shifted by fractions. She looked at Ridge. She looked at Savvy. She looked at the piano. And you could see the entire architecture of her certainty beginning to recalibrate. Someone in the audience, it might have been Ashby, it might have been a younger faculty member, asked it. Why did you leave? It was not quite a question directed at Ridge. It was the kind of thing that gets asked in a room when the question has been building too long to stay unspoken. And Ridge answered it. He answered it quietly, standing at the front of that grand hall with his leather vest and his road-worn boots and his Hell's Angels patch, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and pressed tuxedos. And he said, "The night before my European debut, my younger sister was killed by a drunk driver. She had a son. He was 18 months old. I was the only family he had left." He said it without theater, without breaking. The way people say the hardest things when they have had years to carry them. Not lightly, but steadily. He said he walked away from the tour contract. He said he drove back home and picked up his nephew from a hospital waiting room and took him home and raised him. He said the boy grew up fine, became a mechanic. Good man. He said he never regretted it. He said he put the metronome in a drawer because he thought one day he might want it again, but 25 years passed before today. He looked at Savvy. He said, "I didn't quit music because I failed. I quit because something was more important." Think about what you just heard. A man at the doorstep of everything he had worked for his entire life. A European concert tour, an international debut, a career that was already considered extraordinary, walked away from all of it. Not because he failed, not because he was not good enough, because a child needed him more than music did. And he spent 30 years on a motorcycle, keeping that part of himself quiet, never once asking for credit. And when a room full of people tried to tell his granddaughter that her background was not good enough, he came forward. Not for himself, for her. How does that make you feel? I want you to sit with that for a moment before we continue. The hall was absolutely silent. And then the academy director, not Harrow, but the full director, Dr. Patricia Ellsworth, who had been standing near the entrance since Ridge began to play, stepped forward. She spoke clearly. She said that following what had been heard and witnessed this evening, the question of Savvy Cole's scholarship violation was dismissed. She said that the designation of outside coaching was, in any reasonable interpretation, familial mentorship of the highest order. She said that effective immediately, Savvy's scholarship was being expanded to full merit recognition. The room responded. All of it. The standing ovation was complete. And Harrow clapped. Slowly at first. But she clapped. And whatever that cost her, whatever it required of the version of herself she had constructed over decades of careful, polished certainty, she paid it. That matters. People who are capable of being wrong and then acknowledging it, even late and slowly, are a different category than people who cannot. She was capable. She just had to be pushed to the edge of herself to get there. 6 weeks later, Savvy performed again. This time the program listed her as Savannah Cole, student of Raymond Marcus Cole. She played Chopin, the piece she loves, on her own terms, because she chose it. Ridge sat in the third row this time, not the back. Devlin was beside him. After the performance, Professor Ashby made his way across the hall and shook Ridge's hand and said something private. Ridge nodded once. He looked like a man who had put something down that he had been carrying a long time. Ridge is now teaching free piano lessons twice a week at the Reardon Veterans Center 12 miles from his garage. He drives there on the bike. When donated instruments need to be moved, Devlin brings the truck and 3 other brothers show up to carry them in. A room full of veterans who spent years carrying things nobody thanked them for, learning music from a man who once chose family over everything else he had. Brotherhood does not ask what something looks like. It only asks what it means. Savvy asked him once, after everything, why he finally played again. Why that night? Why after 25 years of silence? That particular hall and that particular moment. He thought about it for a second. Then he said, "They weren't laughing at me. They were laughing at you. And that I will not allow. Real class isn't inherited. It is earned. And sometimes the strongest men are the ones who walked away from glory to protect the people they love." Now I want to ask you something. What would you have done if you were Ridge, sitting in that audience? What would you have done if you were Savvy, standing at that piano in the silence? Comment below. I am reading every single one. If this story moved you, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, real stories about loyalty, grit, and the people the world underestimates, check out the previous videos on the channel. You already know where to find them.